You're listening to the Save the Date podcast, where we talk all things weddings, jewellery and romance, with love from Cullen Jewellery. Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Save the Date podcast. I'm your host, Juliette.
And I'm Sheridan.
And this week we're discussing all things wedding florals. So sit back, relax, get yourself a nice coffee or tea and enjoy this episode. Okay, let's get straight into it and first talk about finding your perfect florist, because I feel like this is a very common theme amongst all your vendors, is finding someone who fits you and what you love and finding someone you click with. And same goes for your florist.
Your florals are a big focal point of your wedding day. They're something that lots of people will most likely remember. One of the first things that they'll see when they walk into your ceremony. So you want to make sure that the florist you choose will be able to match the vibe that you're wanting. And, you know, you need to be able to talk them through exactly what you're wanting for them to be able to execute it.
Yeah, and okay, so let's talk about where do you even start when you start looking for a florist? Everyone naturally would go to Google. You could even go on Pinterest. So very first thing to do with florals, as well as pretty much everything with your wedding, go find some inspo, narrow down what you like and what you don't like and start there. And then after you have a rough idea of the vibe you want to go for, that's when you can start Googling and looking for specific florists, because it's going to be very hard to find a florist if you have absolutely no idea what you're looking for. With saying that though, I do understand some people who don't know much about flowers could find it hard to kind of narrow it down, and you don't know what you want if you haven't looked at it before.
Yeah, I think that you don't necessarily need to know, I want these flowers in particular and this greenery, but at least have kind of the vibe that you're wanting, and especially like a colour palette.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, just, fill your Pinterest board with a bunch of photos of the kind of colours that you like and going off what your colour palette is for your whole wedding. And at least if you have that, you've got a little bit of something in mind that you can go to a florist to, or, look around for a florist that has that similar vibe.
Yeah. And I suppose when you're actually looking at florists themselves, one of the biggest things I would be looking at when you're deciding maybe different ones you want to approach is consistency in what they've produced in the past. And again, it's like, have they got similar examples of the vibe you're going for? And within that, are they consistently producing a product or bouquets that are really great and what you love? Because if it's a bit all over the place, maybe that florist is not the right fit for you, because some florists are just, their specialty is creating some really kind of abstract different bunches for every different client. But if you want a very specific look about your florals, they might not be the right fit because they might go too abstract for you, etc. I mean, that's a very general example, but yeah, definitely look for that consistency with maybe on their social media. You can have a look at photos, or if they've got a bit of a gallery sort of book that you can look through, definitely look through or look for consistency. One of my biggest tips.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
I'd also be asking a lot of questions. Again, same thing with all your other vendors. Ask as many questions as possible, because this is going to, again, just avoid any nasty shocks in terms of price, design, literally everything. You just want to ask a lot of questions and have it written down. And a specific thing you also want to be asking your florist about is if you're choosing to have some sort of like vase or something to hold your flowers in, or those big, what are they called, like pillar things? Those like that you can put on you can put flowers on them, like pedestals. Some florists have the option for you to buy those, and some florists have the option for you to rent those. So that's another thing that you kind of want to be asking questions about and making that decision early on, because again, maybe they don't even have that service at all, and then you might have to go outsource it somewhere else. So if you want a florist that really kind of does it all, something to take into consideration when you're picking your florist. Another consideration you want to take in is the setup of your flowers. Ask questions about this in the early stages because, again, if you want something really specific or if you want something quite grand, you want a ceiling piece, potentially not all florists could offer that, or it could be out of their comfort zone and they might not be able to give you exactly what you want. You probably don't want to be taking any risks on a day like your wedding day, especially when it comes to the setup of those florals. So yeah, again, just ask a lot of these kind of general questions at the beginning and you can get into the nitty-gritty details later on. But yes, definitely something I'd be inquiring about early on.
Yeah, I think overall you want to make sure that the florist you're going with has lots of examples of the kinds of things that you're wanting. So even if, say, you want like a hanging centerpiece, maybe they haven't done it in your colours, but at least they've done it in a whole bunch of other colours that you can see a bit of a guide as to how it's going to look and you know that they can do it. Then that's really important. You don't want to be going in blind. You don't want them to be going in blind trying to do something for the first time.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about spend and how much money you want to put towards florals in your budget because they can be extremely pricey.
They are very expensive. I think if you know nothing about florals, it's probably it can be one of the biggest shocks.
Mm-hmm.
When you go into wedding planning and start looking around just how much money it is for florals, especially for a wedding.
Because, I mean, as a general rule, I feel like 5 to 15% of your overall budget could be all towards florals, which is actually, I feel like, a decent chunk.
That's a decent chunk, 100%.
Yeah, and like the average spend for florals could like a couple thousand, I'd say. Which sounds ridiculous, but like that's for on the cheaper side.
Probably also for something pretty basic. Like you wouldn't be getting any like Pinterest massive centerpieces and florals down the aisles and everything for that cost. That's your pretty basic. Maybe a few florals around at your ceremony, maybe some centerpieces on your tables and your bouquets.
Yeah,
but nothing. I would say that wouldn't go towards anything that's going to be, really major and real statement.
Yeah, because keep in mind, you're not just paying for the fresh flowers. When it comes to florals, you're paying for their expertise, for picking the right flowers to create a bunch that looks really cohesive and really pretty. And you're paying for them to set up on the day. And it's all these little extra things, I suppose, that it's not just the flowers, but I guess I feel like in my mind with the flowers, what the biggest thing I suppose is spending that much is knowing that they'll die after a week. When I think about like, oh my God, they're so expensive. I guess that's where I'm like, oh my God, is it worth it when it comes to flowers? Because you know that they will just die after a week or so. But I suppose it does really make a big difference.
It does,
visually.
Yeah. I mean, for the florals we had for my wedding, they did last a while, considering. I don't know if it's, what they put in the water on the day or anything like that, but they lasted a while, but yes, they do ultimately die
after a while.
And I mean, if that's something that you are kind of really worried about, there is always the option to go artificial, but that's obviously quite expensive as well if you're wanting artificial flowers that look nice. So it kind of just, you've got to weigh that up if you're wanting them to actually be real on the day and you're willing to let them die in a few days.
And a lot of florists as well also have minimum spends.
Yeah.
So like they won't even look at you if you're not willing to spend a certain amount. So that's another thing to really keep in mind when you're going into, your kind of, or starting out on your florals, is be prepared to be knocked back if you're not spending as much as the florist is willing to take on.
There's a lot of florists that you see on, social media, and their minimum spends are far above the average in Australia. Like I've seen florists with minimum spends of upwards of $10,000.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to do something a bit cheaper that is, closer to that average of $2,000, they're not even going to look at you.
You may actually struggle to find the perfect fit for you if that kind of, it narrows it down just a little bit. But yeah, I guess something just to keep in mind. I guess it's all personal preference how much you do want to spend on something like florals, and what your overall budget is. It's also very personal. So yeah, just things to just keep in mind and be aware of, that you don't fall over when they come back to you with a minimum spend of $10,000. And also one tip I was talking to another girl who is a current bride. She's currently planning her wedding. And she was saying that it's also not actually a bad idea to leave your florals to the very end with your budget, and like still allowing for maybe a couple thousand for them, but going to the florist and being like, look, this is how much money I have left over. What can you do for me? Rather than being like, I want this. How much does it cost? Because sometimes when you approach them and be like, look, I've got $3,000 left in my budget. What can you do for me? They actually have a bit more wiggle room, and it kind of forces them to see what they can do. It's almost like a bit of a challenge for them, I feel like, mentally. I don't know if this is actually true, but I feel like they're more willing to do as much as possible for you with that budget, rather than being like, oh no, that if you want that, it's this price.
Yeah, and I think also if you go in with that mindset of, I have this much money, what can we do?
Yeah.
You'll probably be impressed with how much they can do for that amount, rather than going in with all of these photos of really elaborate designs, asking them how much it's going to cost, and then they'll come back to you with an amount that maybe you weren't expecting.
Yes, that's true actually, because I guess going to them with like, I've got 3,000, what can you do? It allows the florist to get creative with what they can do with that budget, rather than, I suppose, locking them into, like all your ideas and being like, I want this, I want this, I want this. And they're like, sorry, no, we can't do that. Or it's like, oh no, that's like flat fee. That's like 6,000 at least, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you can't go to them with some inspiration. You can still say, I'm thinking of, I need X amount of bouquets and this many buttonholes and whatever, but at least then, you get a little bit of creativity from them to see what they can produce for that amount.
Yeah, and if you've got an open mind to what they can come up with, they are ultimately the professionals. And if you've picked someone who you trust and is on the same vibe as you, I feel like you could really come up with something really, really beautiful, even if it is slightly different to what your original thoughts were. And you end up working within the budget that you have, which can be really, really great. All right, let's move on to what are your actual options when it comes to florals. So what are the florals that may be needed, I guess, on your wedding day, which I think the most obvious one is the bouquet for the bride, which I actually have a couple tips for you around this, which I came across, which I thought were really interesting, and things that you may not think about on the day. So when you get the flowers delivered, or specifically the bouquet, it'll obviously most likely be in water to keep them fresh and alive, but you want to be taking the bouquet out. You want to be taking the bouquet out of the water at least 30 minutes before, so it dries off a little bit, because you don't want water droplets down your dress when you're walking down the aisle.
Yeah. I would even say you could probably take it out more than 30 minutes before. Like if your florist is coming to the venue to set up, and 2 hours before the ceremony, you could almost take it out then. Or, an hour before the ceremony and just lay it on a towel.
Yeah, just so it dries up a bit.
Yeah.
And you don't have, water droplets flowing down your dress.
Yeah, the last thing you want.
You don't want a water stain. And then as well, the other thing is actually where you hold the bouquet when you walk down the aisle. And I feel like it's kind of natural to hold it closer up to your chest. Like that's your sort of like when you're holding the bouquet, I feel like it's very natural to kind of hold it a little higher. But in photos, it looks the most natural holding it slightly lower.
Yeah, so you want to hold it low down close to like your belly button, if not lower. And also remember to angle it out. So you want the stem of the flowers to be kind of touching your belly.
Yep.
Rather than holding it up.
Yeah, and that results in the most natural looking and aesthetic.
Yeah, and also that means that when you get your photos done, you're actually going to be seeing the bouquet and not the stems. Next up, we have buttonholes for the main men. So for the groom, father of the bride, father of the groom. We've also got corsage.
Corsages?
Corsages?
Oh, yeah. Did the bridesmaids wear those?
Generally, I think that's more for like mother of the bride, mother of the groom. Bridesmaids would traditionally also have
yes,
the bouquet.
Of course. Yeah.
And then another one is that you might not think about is having a secondary bouquet for the bouquet toss.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So if you're wanting to preserve your own bouquet,
oh, yes. Yeah.
and obviously your bouquet is generally the biggest of the bunch, a lot of people will get a secondary one for the bouquet toss just so that they're not throwing away their nice, beautiful, expensive bridal
the
bouquet.
main one. That's a good one, actually. I like the idea of getting a second one because that can just be a small little one as well, like almost an extra like bridesmaids bouquet in a way.
Yeah.
Just a little extra something.
Yeah. And then you've also got, if you have flower girls, you might have a bouquet for the flower girl or petals. If you're doing a petal toss or if you are having a flower girl that's dropping petals down the aisle, then that is also an extra cost as well.
Yeah.
The loose petals.
Organise all of those. Yeah. And then we move on to the ceremony, which I suppose ceremony and reception potentially go hand in hand. So if you want, obviously it's to do with the floral decor. So if you want at the ceremony, if you want some at the altar, if you want an arch that you're going to stand underneath, some people put them on the pews or on the floor of the aisle. At the reception, you've got your table pieces, other general floral decor. So yeah, let's talk about that because I feel like these are probably the pricier bunches of the lot.
Yeah, well, they're generally the biggest.
Yes.
They're the statement pieces that, you know, people will remember or that'll come up in a lot of your photos, especially from, I guess, the ceremony. Yeah, they're definitely the biggest and probably what comes into that, bringing that cost up quite a bit.
Yes, yeah. And I know some people do reuse their ceremony bunches for their reception, but I suppose something to keep in mind or even just ask questions about is the transportation of if you're going to reuse the florals from your ceremony to a reception, who's in charge of the transport of those flowers, because if you're leaving it up to the florist, potentially it could be quite a pricey transport fee where like it may end up evening out in terms of if you just got extra bunches for the reception. So yeah, definitely something to inquire about because it's always going to be different based on each florist or maybe how far you're traveling between your ceremony and reception. All those little things come into play. So yeah, just definitely more so inquire about it because yeah, you may find that you basically break even and it's just worth getting new bunches for your reception later on. So yeah, definitely want to be asking questions like that. A really great place to start when it comes to your floral decorations is how many you're going to need. Just to give yourself a kind of a rough estimate of how many florals or how many tables maybe you need. A really great place to start when you are thinking about your floral decor is how many bunches you're going to need. So I guess this comes into or pulls into the reception. How many tables do you need to decorate, or if you want to decorate the tables, or if you just want to have some statement pieces up at the front at the ceremony or reception, and kind of work back from there. I feel like when it comes to table florals, a good place to start with that is like maybe going one per table, even when it's like those really long tables. If you have like 3 long tables, usually they're a bunch of small tables lined up. So it's like you can still use that one bunch per table calculation. And then keep in mind as well, you can fill up tables and the rest of the room with stuff like candles, and which like those you could potentially rent or you could buy them and then sell them later. So yeah, you've got a few options when it comes to.
Yeah, and I think keep in mind as well, depending on how you're catering your wedding. So if you're doing, for example, share plates where there's going to be, you know, plates put in the middle of the table and everyone can pick their own, you don't really need to take up as much space on the table as you think you might, because everything's just going to get moved for those plates to go in anyway. So yeah, just keep that in mind as well. How are you catering it? Do you actually need the full table to be kind of filled with decor? Or is it essentially just going to get moved, pushed out of the way to, accommodate for food going in an hour later?
Yeah, and even with, I guess, suppose the room in general, it's like, yeah, what other decorations are you going to have in the room? And like maybe it's going to be filled up by other decor pieces. Like, I know you can use I don't know what they're called, like those drapey sort of curtain things that people, I don't know what they're called. But yeah, that's like another kind of very popular thing I see kind of on Pinterest as an alternative. Again, the candles. So yeah, really, again, have a look what you love and what kind of vibe you want to go for. But yeah, don't feel boxed in to have flowers as your main decor for your wedding at the reception and at the ceremony too. Okay, here's another tip as well. Coming back to the palette of your florals. I know a lot of people typically go for, or I guess it's quite popular for people to go more like a neutral and white color palette when it comes to their florals. But a really good tip is to actually add in some either extra greenery or a flower that's got a really kind of muted color tone. And that really just adds some depth and contrast to the bunch. And again, helps with the flowers not looking blown out in photos and just, yeah, again, kind of enhancing them a little bit because you're adding that extra depth and contrast with that extra color and not just all white. But again, I feel like florists, they will kind of help you the most with that kind of stuff. But yeah, keep an open mind with color palette.
Yeah, your florist will be able to give you a lot of recommendations on what they think will look really, really great with the colours that you're choosing. And also it doesn't hurt to have a conversation then as well with like your photographer and potentially your videographer if you're having one, just to see, you know, if you say these are the flowers that we're thinking of going with, they might say, oh, look, they actually don't photograph very well. So if you are wanting them to look really great in photos, we've seen this work really well with that same colour palette.
Now, something else to keep in mind with when you're kind of deciding what you like and what you don't like, as well as this is probably more applies if there's a flower that you really specifically want, is that some flowers are seasonal. So keep that in mind. If there's one flower that you absolutely love and must have, keep in mind it's not a bad idea to, again, also speak to your florist first up and be like, make sure that they can actually get that flower for you on the date of your wedding. Because, yeah, some flowers are seasonal. So something, important to keep in mind there.
And also, if you are really specific about the kind of flowers that you're wanting, and especially if they are seasonal, they can kind of up the price as well. Mm-hmm. So if, you know, you're wanting a specific flower and it is out of season, it doesn't necessarily mean your florist won't be able to get it, but it will likely be more expensive for them to get that flower for you.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely something to keep in mind as well while we're on the point of cost again is, delivery and installation fees. Keep in mind that it may be an extra cost, or it probably will be an extra cost, and that may not be included in their original quote.
Yeah.
So you might get quoted for the flowers themselves, but then also on top of that, there's delivery and installation of those.
And also like a takedown fee as well. If your venue needs for everything to be out by a certain time or by the next morning, you may need to pay for your florist to come back in to break everything down and to take them away, especially if you've got those big kind of center pieces or statement pieces like an archway, the ceremony.
Yeah, and on that same note, actually, it's another important question you want to be asking is setup and how much time the florist may need to set up what you want on the day, because some venues have a very strict, entry policy, I would say. I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but for example, let's say you've got this big grand ceiling piece that your florist needs a few hours or even maybe the day before to come in and set that up. But the venue is very strict on, no, you can only be here an hour before you have access to the room. That's an issue. So definitely you need to coordinate a little bit potentially with your florist and with the venue itself, and just make sure that, if you're after, again, something quite specific, if that requires a special setup, just make sure that it actually can be done and the florist will have access to your room prior to the wedding or with enough time to set up.
Yeah, because that's common as well, especially if you're going to a venue that's, say, for example, your wedding is at a winery. Some of them will still be open the day of the wedding for a lunch. And so then they won't let you in or any of your vendors in until they've fully closed the venue for the day. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. Ask your venue, make sure that it's going to work for your florist as well to be able to set everything up. So that brings us to the end of this episode. We hope that you learned something new about the florals and got some, good tips and tricks to use when you are planning your wedding. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Save the Date podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.